And good afternoon. Welcome back to yet another episode of Discuss with Russ. I know I make myself sound boring, but I am Russell Rivera, founder and president of Voice Wealth Management. This is our 16th episode, so welcome for joining us again. And my guest this afternoon is Jason Lioi, LCSW. Our topic this afternoon is parenting in a pandemic, and we'd like to welcome all of you watching today on Zoom, on Facebook Live, and on YouTube. For those of you tuning in today for the first time, the Discuss with Russ series is focused on helping you get through the crisis and start thinking and planning for what the world might look like as the crisis dissipates, even though we're not sure how long that will take to actually dissipate. Now that we can leave our homes and see each other face to face again in some capacity, we want to help you anticipate possible responses in society's behavior so you can be most prepared to succeed in your life, in your business, and in your finances. My firm, Voice Wealth Management, primarily works with entrepreneurs, young professionals, and their families to help them get the most out of their money. While I'm a chartered financial analyst and certified financial planner, many also see me as their personal CFO and financial, this is really important for today's program, therapist, in air quotes, recognizing the psychological power of money in addition to using short-term and long-term planning to help you get the most out of every dollar you earn and use. Now on to our guest, Justin Lioi. Justin is a men's mental health and relationship expert based in Brooklyn, New York, and online throughout New York State, Virginia, and internationally. He received his degree from New York University and has been working with men and their families for over 10 years. Justin is a regular speaker on assertiveness, anger, self-compassion, all with the goal of becoming the man you want to be. And he has a particular focus on providing counseling for fathers and guys who are hoping to become dads. As for housekeeping issues, as usual, there's a Q&A tab for asking questions at the bottom. Those of you watching on Facebook Live, we are not monitoring that chat, so please log into register for and log in for the webinar through Zoom if you have any questions. Use the quick Q&A tab rather than the chat, and we'll get to them as appropriate. And as this is being recorded, if you're not watching on Facebook Live, we will tell you how to get a recording at the end of the program. And with that, Justin, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Russ. Great to be here.
So we're talking about parenting in this time, and it's been a challenge for me, obviously, since the lockdowns in mid-March. I have an 11-year-old son, and I'm sure other parents are going through it as well, trying to figure out how to keep kids occupied, learning, happy, all while trying to work themselves if they're fortunate to have a job. I'm obviously not alone. What other issues have you seen parents have over the course of the last several months?
The first thing I just want to say is one thing I've heard again and again is so much guilt that parents are feeling because their kids aren't able to socialize and go to school and all this, that they're taking it on as if they created the pandemic.
Really?
So it's such a knee-jerk reaction sometimes to like, I have to make everything I have to do it perfectly. I have to make my kid's life as wonderful as possible. And I think there's so much non-gentleness that we have with ourselves when we are not able to do that. So for any parents that are listening now and are suffering from that guilt, to just recognize, to be gentle with yourself, to take some of that pressure off, that everyone is doing what they can, and that there are forces outside of our control. So people so when you're asking what else am I seeing, people are falling into this thing of trying to control that which they have no control over. So that's one thing that comes up early on. They're feeling a lot of guilt around that. People's tension is just high. You did not expect, you get a couple of hours break from your children when you go to work or they go to school or both. You get that break from your partner. You marry someone, you love them, you don't expect to be with them 24/7 without being able to leave your house. So a lot of people are struggling with these ideas of that they're almost as if they're supposed to be able to make this work perfectly. And we're in impossible situations, and we're doing what we can to move through them. So I've seen people noting that they're getting they're snapping a little more often, snapping verbally a bit more often. They're talked about substance use or substance overuse more than they would before and stuff like that. People who are people who had nice structure for their kids and for themselves are like, well, every day Saturday. Like what? Like it they're not able to hold to a structure that like experts are telling them they should have for their kids during the day. And that'd be great. That would be great for all of us, for ourselves too. But like when it becomes this thing that when we don't live up to that, we feel so bad about ourselves or so much shame comes up. That's not helpful to anyone.
Wow, you gave me like a lot of things to follow up on there. I think it's interesting that I guess I haven't felt it, but feeling guilt about it for the kids. I feel bad for my son in the sense that he's not able to do the things he needs to do. But I think we'll touch on that a little bit later. But yeah, I think there, how much are you seeing? I think one thing that I also get out of it is kind of this feeling of a loss of control, right? That many people are dealing with that, and how are you kind of, I guess, trying to help people deal with that? I mean, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead here, but yeah, that's just one of the things I get from that is the loss of control that people are feeling from your answer. I'm synthesizing from it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it can be just finding what is in your control, what is in our control, what can we do, what is one thing we can do a week or a day that we can't have play dates with our kids or set those things up, but what can we do for a certain fun time during the day? What we can't go to the gym the way we want to, which was our way to de-stress maybe. What can I do physically for myself once a day or 3 times a week or something like that? So being really honest with yourself and with what you're able to get done within the confines of what we're all living under. And the uncertainty, I mean, that's one of the most difficult things I think we have. Is someone once told me that the key to good mental health is becoming comfortable with uncertainty. And I don't know anyone who necessarily has done so yet, but this has just really kicked our butt into what, what, I mean, it goes back to not having the control of it. We just don't know what's next. Is it going to get worse? Is it going to get better? It looks like this, it looks like that. And living with that can be so uncomfortable. And depending on the level of resilience we all have, some of us are a lot more flexible and can go with the flow a little bit more. Those of us who know that we like structure and like structured our lives around that. And if that borders towards rigidity, it gets difficult, if not impossible, to kind of keep that up. Just kind of forcing ourselves to feel a lot of unnecessary suffering than we need.
Yeah, and I think you're right. When we didn't know what was ahead of us for a day, and the world was changing every 5 minutes, that I can understand that. I think the fact that we've gotten to where we can, whether it's just maybe see 2 weeks in front of our face, is making people feel a little bit better, and at the same time feeling very anxious when it comes to dealing with schools.
Well, if I could just say, there were some people who early on were not happy with it, but when they knew, oh, you can't go outside except to go shopping or something like for food shopping, like that was actually easier for a lot of more people than we're in this place now, at least in New York, where it's like it's not as black and white as it was. It wasn't as either or. Sometimes we feel more comfortable in that, even though it's a false sense of comfort. Now that it's like we have to make decisions and we're mitigating our risk, that for people who are prone to anxiety, that could be really even more difficult and brings up that uncertainty.
Wow, that's really interesting. Okay. That makes a lot of sense too, right? Like when it's like, if you're telling me I've got to stay in my house, that's fine. And that makes sense. And kind of mixed messaging might be having an issue for some people. So let me ask you this, since we're talking about parenting today as the main topic, how do the unique challenges of parenting in this time differ based on the age of the kids in a family?
Yeah, I think that may even go back to your earlier thing about what you're saying with you're not feeling this, you're feeling bad for your son, but not guilty. I think a lot of people I've been talking to had much younger kids, and they had that. So they I think your son's 11, right? So
Yeah.
there's a level of independence that he has that someone who has a 4 and a 6-year-old they don't have, and they're really feeling very responsible for what this kid's life is, what their development is during the whole day. And of course, at a certain age, you can't leave them alone at all while you're also trying to do your work. So there's a sense of guilt of not being able to do it all. But one of the major things I'd say development-wise is that up until 5 or 6, this is going to vary for people, like kids are pretty, we call it egocentric. Whatever's going on in the world, they see it from only their perspective. So if you're angry, you must be angry at them. If something's going well, it's because of how great they are. They interpreted everything as if like it's about them. So as we are managing our anxieties and fears and anger and grief and loss throughout this, depending on how old your child is, they are taking in what you were, no matter how good a job you might think you're hiding it. Kids are pretty good at reading stuff. There's someone who once said that kids are great detectives, but they're horrible interpreters. They interpret it all about them, but they always know when something's off. So the younger they are, the more they're going to be taking the cue from you that like they're doing something wrong or something's off about that. The older they are, they still need you to like let them know that you're going to do everything you can to keep them safe and all those things. But there is more of a separation of like, oh, dad had a harder day, and you can articulate that more to him. It's not about you. I had a rough couple of things here, so we'll talk later. Which you can't really say to a 4-year-old.
Right.
Yeah, so that's a big thing, and the responsibility for like what they need for their development is different too. Like kids need to be around a lot of kids, and a lot of 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 16-year-olds do really well on the Zooming with their friends. When I say really well, they need more than that, but they can do that in a way that 6 and younger, where you need to be physical with each other, with your friends, just walking around, that sitting still in a Zoom call with a bunch of other 5-year-olds is nowhere near the same thing, and they need a lot more than that.
So, you mentioned my son and all you got it right on the independence and all those things, especially at his age where it's starting to come and then it all gets kind of taken away. Yeah, no, and he's still missing you'll like this. He's still missing his first girlfriend, so like he hadn't cut his hair until February because she had told him she likes hair long. I mean, we finally got him to cut his hair on Friday a little bit. And, again, he doesn't want to cut it again until school starts in the hopes that, he sees her with that. But, yeah, it's really cute. But what other what other challenges are kids of different ages facing, right? Like, obviously, you mentioned the kids who have to, right, at younger ages, they're egocentric. They need to be physical with people. They can't get the same out of a computer interaction. What else is there?
Well, there's also the idea that when we're younger, we have more of the sense that like, even the idea that, of what consequences are. I mean, those of us who are older recognize more what the consequences just this pandemic and stuff is, as opposed to kids who think, okay, we'll just move through it. It's not, I know a lot of even teenagers who just weren't taking it as seriously, and their parents were, and they were putting their parents at risk for that. So having that kind of talk with your kid, and that responsibility that you might get sick, but if you get me sick, that could be a horrible thing that may come out of this if it's traced back to like, as the virus moves between a family and somebody gets really ill or dies, God forbid. So there's that idea of just where are the types of brains and development that we're having in different stages of our life. And kids, I mean, there's a reason as they move into adolescence that they get more independence and privacy, and how, depending on where you live and how small your place is, the idea of privacy for a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old is really difficult to have if you are in home with parents and maybe grandparents and other siblings and stuff like that. Teenagers need a place to like learn who they are apart from their family, stuff like that. So that's another area where that stuff is coming up.
Fair
And I
enough.
mean, all the activities that people look forward to all the sports or just physical activities that often happen more in the summer, all year long, of course, that is just a way of managing feelings, learning ways of interacting with others, testing themselves and challenging themselves. Different places are doing it and are modifying what can be done, but it's a loss.
Interesting, and probably also true. Yeah, because I can think about older kids and still like the fact that they need to be working on themselves physically and are really starting to kind of feel their way for where they are in the world, and their world has now been shrunk by 95, 98, 99%. So I certainly understand that thinking. I've spoken with parents whose kids have had issues either before or a result of this crisis, who are, maybe the kids have had to start doing therapy, but they're having challenges doing it remotely. What's been your experience with doing therapy with parents, maybe with kids in this realm, and how long is it likely to last?
Well, I can't tell the future for the last part. I work one-on-one with adults and parents, not so much kids anymore. So I know that it's actually been very helpful for a lot of people to adapt to, that they don't, especially the ones with really young kids, like when they had to go to a therapist's office, they had to lose an hour getting there. It was a 45-minute session, an hour home. Like this, they can fit into a day where they don't have to lose the time with their kids. So that's worked out well. They haven't had to travel. A lot of people I've worked with were doing this right from work. So that was okay too, so that they didn't have to travel and spend extra time doing that. Excuse me. People are in their more comfortable surroundings sometimes too, which can, and I'm saying all the positive ways of this, why this has been helpful. Some of the negative things is finding the privacy. Is anyone overhearing you? Like, how are you setting that up? Are you setting it up? If you have kids, are they busting in the middle of your session? I've had that happen many times in the past couple of months. And that can be a challenge. For kids, I mean, some people can, again, this can go with not just developmental age. There's also like the sense of, if you're on Zoom calls all day for work and school, and then your therapy is one more hour that you're in front of a screen, it could be challenging for people. So I have found people sometimes just acknowledging it, like, this is what we've got right now. And you're making decisions that, like, it's not optimal for me, but I also know I need to get this done, so I'm going to do that. I don't know how long it's going to last. I mean, some people might want to continue with this,
Right.
kind of doing things online after they go back into their offices and schools, and some will find alternative ways.
Sure. And of course, that's always going to be the way it is. And I think that's one of the things, obviously, about this is people are finding that, like you said, from a time efficiency standpoint, this might be something people want to do. Whereas for others, they really need the in-person, face-to-face, three-dimensional connection in order to make that really work, or at least some of the time, right?
I think we've also recognized as parents, as teachers, as therapists, as people, how what we can do creatively. I mean, I know we have found ways to utilize the technology. I have play therapist friends who are doing different backgrounds, doing stuff like that, and finding ways to incorporate that into the therapy. So there's for those, once we got over some of the fears of the technology, how could this possibly work? We're like, all right, even if it's not how I want to work, or if it's not how I want to receive my therapy, how do we make the best of what we do have? And some people have really been able to do some surprising things. I have found actually that I work with mostly men, that guys can often be more vulnerable with the distance of this, of online therapy than often when they were in the office.
What do you mean by that?
They're talking about kind of deeper things. They're even getting in touch with some tears sometimes in a way that they did not do when we were like sitting three-dimensional, as you said, in an office together.
Why do you think that might be?
Sometimes it could be the comfort of where they are. Sometimes the ability to not be totally on top of each other in an office has allowed them the space. There's an academic term for it, which I'm not remembering right now, but there's some kind of the disinhibition effect. Some academics have labeled it. And I don't think they know exactly why it happens, but it's a phenomenon that we've been seeing more and more as online therapy over the past couple of years has been growing.
Understood. So you don't know how long it'll last, of course, but how well do you think people are adjusting, right? Like in the sense of, are we on this way to this feeling of normal, whatever that ends up meaning? Like, you'll have people in my business say, we're only in the third inning of this crisis, especially when you're dealing with something financial, but they might use it for any crisis. Where do you think it, and that's not really the question I'm asking, but like in terms of getting people to a point where they feel like they've adjusted, they feel they've brought in everything they need to do in order to go from, like, I'd almost call it damage control. I don't know. I'm creating words as we go, but you know what I mean? To saying, okay, this is what it is. You know what I'm saying? Like, I guess I've heard this in the past, and I had a conversation with a prior therapist we had on the program, like comparing this to kind of a grief reaction. Everything that we've gone through, some of the things that I read in the early days, like, what do you think it'll take for people to kind of say, okay, I can move forward, I guess? I know that's a lot of talk, and I'm not sure I got my idea out there, what I was trying to ask.
I think you did, because I think you're asking for some comfort that I don't think anyone's able to really provide for ourselves right now. I mean, once we get used to and adapt to a particular quote normal, it shifts. And that's what we're talking about before with the uncertainty and the lack of control, is those of us who are doing better during this are the ones that are more open and more resilient to the constant shifts. So once it's like when you in the early days of having a baby, once you're like, oh, they got a sleep schedule, that's great, and that works for what, a week, 2 weeks, and then the next thing happens. And I mean, as they grow older, once you've cracked the code of parenthood, the kid does something that we're not expecting. So in a less positive, fun way, like we've seen, I mean, all the different ways people are trying to do different things, and thinking, okay, now we're in this, even this idea of like phases. Sometimes it's like, I don't know how linear all of this is. And if we try to find that, even when we're talking about the grief reactions, one of the things that gets people really caught up in that is like, oh, okay, so I'm supposed to go from denial to anger to negotiation to depression to acceptance. And it rarely works in that way. It's here and then back and then up to number 4 and this. So, I mean, we need to be ongoingly monitoring ourselves for when, like, oh, I'm a little more irritated than I was last week. What's happening? Oh, okay. I was expecting this and I was pushing into this, but like, no. So it's really connecting with all the fight, freeze reactions that we talk about, fight, flight, freeze reactions of like, what is the stress of what I'm going through? How is it manifesting? And going back to yourself, whether you're with people or not, to be like, how am I adapting to today, to tomorrow, to next week? I think I might have talked all around your question.
Oh, that's fine. But you brought up something interesting that might be an apropos analogy, in the sense of, and actually probably taps on your expertise, and at least in your therapeutic practice, in terms of how does this compare to some extent to having a baby, in the sense that, right, like, you don't know what's coming next. All of this uncertainty as a new parent, just when you think you kind of got something figured out, something shifts. And to some extent, you could almost argue that this has progressed in somewhat the same way, I don't know if I could, I'm just going off the top of my head. I don't know if I could draw specific parallels to milestones, but I kind of understand where that comes from. What do you think?
I would hate to be on record saying the coronavirus is like a little baby. But the mindset of we don't know what's next and how do we deal with that. There's no book that is going to tell us. There's no therapist. There's no life coach that is going to be able to let us know how to be and what it's going to be like at every step of the way. I'm just going to go back to like those of us who struggle with adapting to things and living with uncertainty. This is the time to kick into those new skills and what's uncomfortable about that.
Well, it's interesting, like, right? And I'm going to close the analogy here. It is like birthing a new world. We'll close it with that, right? So to some extent, that's where we are. I don't have any questions yet. If you are watching and you have a question, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. Just one or two more questions that I have at least scripted for Justin at this point. Given the shock that we've all gone through, it is important that someone who needs help gets it. What are the signs someone should look for in themselves or someone in their family to suggest that they seek counseling?
I mean, some red flags can be substance overuse or more use of that than before, increased aggression in any way, whether verbal or physical, of course. If you're sleeping a hell of a lot more or a hell of a lot less, if you're not able to find ways to kind of self-regulate, to be like, all right, how do I get back to a center place? Ever. I'm not saying you should be able to live your life in that nirvana state, but and I'm saying all this to say it's not because someone's will diagnose you with a trauma disorder or anxiety or depressive disorder or something like that, so much as finding a place apart from your partner and your friends and your kids to just zone in on you and what you're dealing with, and talking about whether it's coping skills, talking about what it's bringing up for you, is helpful without the stigma that often comes with a diagnosis, unfortunately. I have found a lot of people want to feel that the crisis, that the pandemic is not affecting them, that they will tell me, I don't want to talk about that. I came in for this in January. And I'm like, yes, we need to continue talking about this. But if we pretend that like the world did not significantly shift, it's like we're boxing with one arm tied behind our back. We're not taking in the whole picture. So we talked about red flags. Certainly if there are increased thoughts of like harming yourself, or you're thinking you're gonna harm someone else or something like that, or you're at that breaking point, please absolutely reach out. But it doesn't have to get to that point for you to be like, I'm feeling anxious a lot. And it's not because it's internal. There's a good reason to. But I might be able to use someone else to like bounce some things off that I don't have to take care of. Because as a partner, as a parent, you spend a lot of time taking care of others. It can be nice and helpful to what is the saying? You have to fill your own cup first, or put on the mask before you
put on your own oxygen mask before helping others.
Yeah.
Sorry about that with the camera there.
So you can't pour from an empty cup. That's what someone.
Okay.
That's what I meant.
Very good. I guess you mentioned the substance abuse. I mean, it's kind of that's actually really interesting in the sense that, or substance use. You didn't even use the term abuse, in the sense that, right, if you looked at what happened after the first couple of months of this crisis, you saw alcohol usage was way up. And it's kind of one of those things where, from a non-therapeutic standpoint, right, from a complete layman, it's like, well, I guess that kind of makes sense, because if you're stuck inside your house, what else are you gonna do? If you want that outlet. But I can obviously see how that becomes dangerous very quickly. you know, if you get to a certain level or it starts to do too much. So anything else, anything specific you're seeing in terms of, I'm obviously thinking about in terms of alcohol. I know you're thinking about it in more than that. Any particular trends you're seeing in people who need help and maybe people who even don't need help in terms of that, or you know, in terms of substance use, and again, where that line might be that someone should get maybe not the help of you, but someone else versed in substance issues?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is, again, like noting what were you doing before and what are you doing now. So how are you using this to cope in a way that is avoiding some feelings that need to be expressed somehow, because those feelings are going to come out somewhere, even if you are between some kind of substance, kind of using it as a kind of anesthesia. It is, if you're doing it more, what are you not taking in that you need to be available for? So, and certainly people who have addictions, if they, people who have relapsed or have increased that, it can get really dangerous. I mean, you know, early on, there were loads of Zoom happy hours, and they're still going on. And there's nothing per se wrong with that. It's just a matter of, is there a lot that is being avoided? And what if you actually looked at some of that, and maybe you'd find some more healthier ways to move through things. And then you can enjoy, if that's something you can enjoy, a cocktail at another time.
So I guess, you know, we've covered a lot about the parenting and the mental aspect. I guess that the one other thing that people are feeling very out of control about is obviously their finances. And while we did the whole air quote thing, you know, obviously I tend to know that psychology, personal behavioral finance is a very big element of what people are doing. But in terms of new parents, in terms of dealing with the crisis, what kind of issues are you seeing with people discussing their financial situations, and what kind of help are you recommending that they do if they're, you know, something that is outside of the realm of what I do, but more into the realm of what you do?
Well, the worst thing that people are doing is not discussing it at all and pretending that it's not a thing. So people, I mean, money is a place where we can contain so many emotions that don't get expressed, whether by withholding money or showering money or doing something in between. I mean, people are hopeful. I mean, if I'm talking to someone who is not bringing in their partner in on these conversations, I'm certainly encouraging to like discuss how are your financial decisions changing with the uncertainty that we're living in, or what's going on with jobs and stuff like that. And are you talking about this? Because it's, and I just keep stressing that because it's so often avoided. I've talked to people who like don't even discuss different financial places before they get married. I'm sure you see this as well. Like people who've like never had that conversation about like what people make, what people have, what debt people have, and stuff like that. So
that can surprise, yes.
Yeah. So it's not a time to just kind of put your head in the ground, but also to look for people who might be able, like a financial planner or other people who will be able to see you without some of those emotions in the way and can help you kind of move through them to make some smarter decisions, which might not make sense when we're very anxious or very depressed. It is hard to make good decisions about anything, and certainly about finances.
Oh, absolutely. Not that I've had to deal with it, but I think about people who have, they had their spouse die, and I know I've heard people say, and it's standard in our business, like, don't make any big changes for a while. You don't, you're still dealing with processing, having this person you've been with for a very long time, not having them in your life and trying to figure out what that looks like. Don't say I'm, going to go spendthrift or running away or whatever it might, moving somewhere else, you have to be able to deal with that in that particular perspective. I know I just got a little quiet there, but thank you, Justin. So how can people contact you?
Best way is my website, parkslopetherapist.com. You can get in touch with me through there, call, email. We can set up a time to chat about whether it would be good to work together. And certainly my website, there's lots of posts and stuff about all these things that we're going through and finding our own ways of coping with it.
All right. Thank you, Justin. It's been fun. I have appreciated you having you on today.
Thank you so much, Russ. It's been fun to talk.
All right. Once again, I want to thank Justin Lioi for joining us today on Discuss with Russ. For those of you who want to reach out to me, I can be reached at russell.rivera@voicewealth.com. That's russell.rivera@voicewealth.com. Or give me a call at 646-630-0980. For those of you wanting a copy of the recording, we'll be sending a follow-up email with the link to the recording, which will eventually be placed on in about a week, voicewealth.com/blog, or you can view all of our videos at the Voice Wealth Management YouTube channel. And that's all our past episodes and our Instablog series and everything else. We already have 3 great episodes lined up for August. Next week, August 5th, we have Anthony Verna of Verna Law discussing intellectual property and business opportunities in these times of disruption. On August 12th, Jack Craven, CPA of Media CPAs, will discuss what to do if you haven't filed your taxes in a while. And on August 19th, we'll be joined by Aaron Shipp of NYU and CEO of the Ivy Edge to discuss the 2020-21 college admissions landscape and just higher education in general. If you'd like to register for any of those webinars, you can reach out to me again at russell.rivera@voicewealth.com and check your email inboxes for registration details. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Discuss with Russ.